Meow, meow. Hello, my dear sleepy friends. It's me, Golden Chonk, your perfect guide to the mysteries hidden in time and sand. Tonight, we journey to a place of legend and wonder, a land whispered about since antiquity. What if everything we've been told about Atlantis is wrong? Imagine a lost civilization, not submerged beneath the waves, but hidden within the sands of Africa's greatest desert. We're journeying to the Richat Structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. Could this mysterious geological formation be the true location of Atlantis? Stay with me, Golden Chonk, as we unravel astonishing evidence and explore the secrets of Atlantis, the sunken continent beneath the Eye of the Sahara. A story that might just rewrite history as we know it. Imagine, if you will, a great civilization spoken of only in hushed tones and ancient scrolls. A city of concentric circles gleaming under the sun, overflowing with riches and knowledge, pride and power. And then, in one fateful day and night, vanished without a trace. Atlantis. The very name conjures images of a golden age lost to time, a paradise swallowed by the sea. But what if, just what if, that fabled city did not sink under the ocean at all? What if it lies hidden in an unlikely place, beneath endless drifting sands? What if the Sahara Desert, silent and empty under the moonlight, holds the key to this enduring mystery? Could it be that the Eye of the Sahara, a massive circular formation etched in African soil, is gazing up at the stars with ancient secrets locked within its rings? What if Atlantis is not as lost as we think, but simply sleeping beneath our very feet? Close your eyes and settle into your coziest spot. Let the gentle rumble of my purrs relax you as we set sail on a sea of imagination. In this calm and dreamy journey, we'll wander through 10 chapters of our tale. We'll recall the myth of Atlantis, decipher the philosopher's clues left in old texts, and see the eye revealed in the remote Sahara. We'll listen for ancient echoes in the desert, peruse the forbidden maps that hint at hidden lands, and ponder suppressed evidence of civilizations unknown. We'll entertain the alien architect theory for the more fantastical possibilities. Envision a continent in the sand stretching beneath dunes and trace echoes of a lost race in our world today. Finally, as the night deepens, we'll witness Atlantis awakens, not with noise or fury, but softly in the stirrings of curiosity and hope. So breathe deeply, dear one, and let's begin our adventure into the unknown. Chapter 1. The Myth of Atlantis. Let me tell you a secret from the pages of time. A story passed down for over 2 millennia. In the warm glow of lamplight, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato once wove a tale for his students, a tale of a mighty island empire called Atlantis. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC, Plato describes a land beyond the known world. An island larger than Libya and Asia Minor put together, a place of astounding wealth and beauty. According to the story, Atlantis existed some 9,000 years before Plato's era. That would be over 11,000 years ago from today, long before any civilization we currently know. It was a time when, as the Egyptian priests in the story said, other nations were still young, and great kingdoms rose and fell long before the first pyramids or temples we recognize. In Plato's myth, Atlantis was a utopia of sorts, blessed by the sea god Poseidon and made splendid by the labor of its people. The island boasted fertile plains yielding rich harvests and mountains to the north that caught gentle rains. Exotic animals roamed its fields, including elephants, the largest beasts, which gives you a sense of how lush and abundant this land must have been. At the center of Atlantis stood its marvelous capital city, arranged in concentric circles of land and water. Imagine rings like a target. 2 rings of land separated by rings of seawater, all surrounding a central island. Bridges and canals connected the rings, and at the very heart, on the central island, rose golden temples and the palace of the kings of Atlantis. The buildings glittered with precious metals. One metal in particular, orichalcum, glowed with a ruddy fire and was said to be second only to gold in value. The Atlanteans mined orichalcum from their land and paneled the walls of their temples with it, so that at sunrise and sunset, the whole city would shimmer red and gold. a sight to behold. Atlantean society, as the legend goes, was powerful and technologically advanced. They dug a great canal from the city to the sea, carving harbours and docks to berth hundreds of ships. They built irrigation networks to water their vast plain and engineered magnificent architecture. Their influence spread far beyond their island. The mythic tale says the Atlanteans ruled over many islands and lands, even extending their dominion into parts of Libya as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Italy. They grew proud and ambitious, and in time, they sought to subjugate all the Mediterranean peoples. Only the Proto-Athenians, the ancestors of the Greeks, stood against them and managed to halt their advance. According to the story Plato recounts, it's a grand tale of hubris and downfall, one meant as much to teach a lesson as to recount history. And then, in a single night of divine wrath, it all ended. The tale tells us that the gods grew displeased with Atlantis' pride and greed. In one grievous day and night, violent earthquakes shook the land and the island of Atlantis sank beneath the sea, vanishing into mud and water. An entire civilization gone in a blink of an eye. The ocean swallowed Atlantis so completely that navigation became impossible in that area. The sea turned shallow, clogged with silt and debris from the sunken island, a shoal of mud, as Plato describes, that made the waters impassable. Imagine the trauma of that memory echoing down the ages, an ocean turning thick and brown, boats unable to pass, and beneath the waves, where a flourishing city once stood, only silence and ruins remained. It's a haunting image, isn't it? For centuries, readers of Plato debated whether the tale of Atlantis was history or mere allegory. You see, Plato was a philosopher with a penchant for embedding lessons in his stories. Many scholars have thought Atlantis was just a parable, a cautionary fable about the dangers of arrogance, meant to highlight the virtues of an ideal society, represented by ancient Athens, versus a decadent one, Atlantis. In fact, most classicists view Atlantis as a fictional device Plato used to make a point. And yet, the level of detail in the story is tantalizing. Plato provides specific descriptions, the exact layout of the city, the surrounding geography, even measurements. He writes that the diameter of the Atlantean capital's outermost ring was 127 stadia, which modern estimates put around 23 kilometers or 14 miles. He names the god Poseidon's mortal wife Cleito and their 10 sons who became the first kings of Atlantis. He describes bridges and horse racing tracks on the outer ring, and even the colors of the stone quarried from the ground, black, white, red, which the Atlanteans used to build their walls. These vivid particulars feel like memories of a real place. Over the years, countless people, explorers, archaeologists, mystics, and dreamers of all stripes, have become enchanted by the Atlantis story. It's not hard to see why. A lost utopian civilization destroyed by a cataclysm is the stuff of enduring legend, tapping into our collective imagination. There's a deep human yearning in it, the possibility that we were once more advanced or enlightened, and that knowledge was lost, but perhaps could be found again. And of course, the dramatic mystery. If Atlantis really existed, where is it now? Could any trace be left for us to find after so many millennia? In the golden evening of the ancient world, other writers after Plato mentioned Atlantis too, though often they were just remarking on Plato's tale rather than providing new info. Some ancient historians like Strabo or Plutarch alluded to Atlantis in passing, and later, philosophers like Proclus kept the discussion alive. But none gave us more detail than Plato's original account from the Egyptian priests. That only deepened the enigma. The Egyptians, according to Plato, had preserved records of Atlantis on the walls of a temple in the city of Sais. If true, those records are long lost, perhaps burned with the Library of Alexandria or crumbled to dust in the desert. And so, for ages, Atlantis lay in the realm of myth and conjecture. Was it simply a moral story? A distorted memory of some other historical event, like the volcanic destruction of the island of Therosus Santorini, which did wipe out a Bronze Age civilization? Or was it an actual place waiting to be rediscovered? As you listen and drowse, let the uncertainty itself become part of the allure. In every age, there have been whispers that maybe, just maybe, Atlantis was real. And if it was, we must consider where such a place could have been. For how does an entire continent or island hide from history? Perhaps only by changing its form, from lush land to deep ocean, or maybe from ocean to sand. Keep that thought close as we continue. The myth of Atlantis has set the stage, painting in broad strokes a portrait of a lost paradise. Now it's time to seek the clues that might anchor this tale in reality. Let's step gently from legend into the realm of clues and possibilities, guided by the words of philosophers and the watchful gaze of the night. Chapter 2. The Philosopher's Clues. To find a lost land, one must start with the clues left behind. Even if those clues come from a philosopher's pen in a time when myth and history intertwined. Plato, being our primary source, gave a surprising amount of information about Atlantis' location and nature within his dialogues. Let us sift through those ancient words, like archaeologists brushing sand off a fossil, to see what hints glimmer beneath. According to Plato's narrative, the story of Atlantis was relayed to the Greek lawgiver Solon by Egyptian priests around 600 BC. Solon, visiting the city of Sais in Egypt, was told that the Egyptians kept records far older than any in Greece. A learned priest pointed to temple inscriptions that recounted a great empire beyond the Mediterranean world, the mighty Atlantis, and the war it waged against the early Mediterranean peoples. The priest teased Solon by saying the Greeks had forgotten their own past, like children with no memory, whereas the Egyptians had written accounts of an epoch 9,000 years before, when Athens and Atlantis both were great. So the first clue is temporal. Atlantis' fall occurred 9,000 years before Solon's time. That places it roughly around 9600 BC. To put that in perspective, that's the end of the last ice age, an epoch when humans were just beginning to transition from nomadic life to farming in some parts of the world. A stunningly early date for an advanced civilization, a clue that, if taken seriously, implies the standard timeline of history might have missing chapters. What about geography? Plato situates Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which was the ancient term for the narrow strait we know as the Strait of Gibraltar, where the Mediterranean Sea opens into the Atlantic Ocean. Beyond the Pillars, in the true ocean, the Atlantic, lay an island empire. He describes Atlantis as an island, yes, but also uses the word in Greek nesos, which can mean not only island, but also peninsula or land bounded by water in some way. Interestingly, he says Atlantis ruled other islands and even parts of the adjacent continent. He also mentions that Atlantis was in front of the Pillars of Hercules, implying perhaps that as one exited the Mediterranean, Atlantis was right there across the sea, not extremely far off in the Atlantic depths. From Atlantis, one could travel to other islands and eventually to a real continent on the opposite side of the Atlantic, perhaps hinting at the Americas, or perhaps just poetically speaking of a great expanse beyond. So the classical placement has always been assumed to be somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, west of Gibraltar. Many past seekers looked to the Azores, or Canary Islands, or imagined a mid-Atlantic continent now sunk. But hold that thought, because not all clues point seaward, some point inward. Plato describes the plain of Atlantis as a broad, rectangular plain surrounded by mountains that descended toward the sea. The plain was said to open to the ocean on its south and was sheltered by mountains to its north. Rivers flowed from those mountains across the plain. Now imagine northern Africa's geography. The Sahara Desert today has the Atlas Mountains in the northwest and various highlands in its interior. In a different climate, could there have been a fertile plain in what is now the Sahara, bordered by mountains and open to the sea in the south or west? It's a curious parallel to consider, but we will get to the Sahara soon. For now, keep in mind that the directions north and south in Plato's clues might align with real features somewhere, if not out in the Atlantic, then perhaps along a coast or even inland. Another clue lies in the name Atlantis itself and its linguistic relatives. The island's first king in the story was Atlas, son of Poseidon, and thus the land took his name, as did the ocean around it, the Atlantic. Coincidence or not, we have the Atlas Mountains in Morocco and Algeria, and legend calls the ocean beyond them the Atlantic because of either Atlas the Titan or King Atlas in myth. And then there's an intriguing point. A region in northwest Africa, modern Morocco's Mauritania, was known in antiquity as the Kingdom of Mauritania, whose king at one time, in later classical history, was also named Atlas in some accounts. Could the Greek Atlantis tale have tangled roots with African names and legends? The word Atlantes was even used by Herodotus, an ancient Greek historian before Plato, to describe a people living in Libya, northwest Africa, near Mount Atlas, who do not dream in their sleep. A strange, almost mystical reference. It's a slim thread, but perhaps an echo of Atlanteans making its way into Greek knowledge, or simply a name reused. Still, the recurrence of Atlas in that region is worth a sleepy thought. Let's examine a key passage from Plato, as it holds a vital clue that will steer our journey. He wrote that when Atlantis sank, it created impassable mud shoals, making the sea above it unnavigable. Now, picture the aftermath of a sunken land. If an entire large island collapsed beneath the waves, the seafloor and sediments might indeed rise closer to the surface in spots, creating shoals or shallows. But Plato insists ships could not get through the area. This has perplexed many because in the open Atlantic Ocean, how would mud shoals block ships for long? Currents would disperse silt and the ocean is deep. One interpretation is that Plato or his sources were describing something more like an inland sea or a shallow oceanic basin that became choked with sediment. Perhaps Atlantis was not in the deep Atlantic at all, but in a seaway that could be filled with debris when disaster struck. If we entertain that notion, is there a place that fits? There have been wild theories. Some thought of the North Sea, which was once land called Doggerland that flooded after the Ice Age. But that's far from the Pillars of Hercules. Others consider the Caribbean or the Mediterranean like the eruption of Santorini, which devastated Minoan Crete and matches some of Plato's story, but not all. And then, some eyes have turned to the west coast of Africa, where vast stretches of the Sahara might once have held lakes or even shallow seas that have since dried or silted up. The idea of an impassable mud brings to mind a marsh or dried seabed, doesn't it? Could Atlantis have been a flourishing oasis that turned into a muddy swamp and then to desert? These interpretations stretch the text, but they are food for thought as we gather clues. Plato's clues also include curious details of Atlantean engineering. They dug a huge canal 300 feet wide through their outer rings to connect the city to the ocean. And they had hot and cold springs, magnificent baths, and racetracks. They even built temples with enormous statues, one of Poseidon driving 6 winged horses. It's a picture of a highly developed culture. If any of that were true, in a literal sense, remnants would likely have sunk in the sea or been buried by now. Yet, some tantalizing pieces of the puzzle continue to emerge. For instance, there are ancient ruins on seabeds in various parts of the world. We will muse on those later. And unexplained megaliths in places they shouldn't be, given our mainstream timeline of civilization. It's important to note, my dear friend drifting in and out of wakefulness, that mainstream historians and archaeologists remain skeptical that Atlantis was ever a real place. And indeed, Plato's own student, Aristotle, reportedly quipped that his teacher, who invented Atlantis, also destroyed it, suggesting it was all made up. And yet, the clues remain. The specific time frame, the location beyond known waters, the concentric rings, the grand size, the sudden inundation. These clues beckon the curious. They have led many a seeker to propose one location after another, from the island of Santorini in the Aegean to the submerged island of Bimini in the Bahamas, to the far-off notions of Antarctica or Indonesia. Atlantis has been found, in theory, dozens of times in dozens of places, each theory grabbing onto certain clues and overlooking others. But one of the newest and most captivating theories has brought us here, to the edge of the Sahara Desert. It takes Plato's clues and matches them in an unexpected way to a natural marvel in Mauritania, the so-called Eye of the Sahara. How does a desert fit the story of a drowned island? That is the mystery we are here to unravel gently. Perhaps the word island was mistranslated. Perhaps the sea that swallowed Atlantis was not the Atlantic Ocean, but a flood of a different kind. Perhaps, indeed, Atlantis did not sink under waves, but sank beneath sand and time. Let's leave the musty halls of Plato's Academy now, carrying the clues we've gathered like a lantern to light our path. We have in hand an ancient map of words that point beyond the Mediterranean to an empire with circular city rings, near mountains, by a plain, destroyed by a flood of mud. And far away, on the other side of the world known to the Greeks, lies a vast desert where an eye-shaped structure peers into the sky. In the next chapter, under the soft glow of stars, we'll glide over endless dunes to behold that eye of the Sahara and let it tell its story. Chapter 3. The Eye Revealed. Our journey now carries us high above the African continent, as though on the wings of a night bird, or perhaps in the mind's eye of an astronaut gazing down from orbit. Below stretches the mighty Sahara Desert, an ocean of sand larger than the United States, silent waves of dunes and rocks stretching to every horizon. In the daytime, this land is sun-scorched and shimmering with heat, but under the moon's gentle gaze it cools and quiets, a silver-grey expanse of mystery. As we drift over Mauritania in the Western Sahara, something startling suddenly appears in the monotony of sand and stone. A vast set of concentric circles, almost like a ripple frozen in the earth, or the iris of a giant eye staring back at us. This is the Richat Structure, affectionately nicknamed the Eye of the Sahara. In this soft desert night, the eye lies unveiled in pale relief. A circular geologic wonder up to 25 miles across, etched into the desolation. For ages, only local nomadic peoples knew of this curious formation, perhaps seeing parts of its rings while traveling by camel across the Adrar Plateau. To them, it was just another part of the landscape, perhaps even a sacred or peculiar one. In local Arabic, it's sometimes called Kelb Richat, meaning the Eye of Richat, as if acknowledging it as a giant eye of the earth. But to the outside world, the eye remained hidden until the era of modern exploration. French geologists in the 20th century stumbled upon it while mapping, thinking at first it might be an ancient meteor impact crater because of its circular shape. Yet no evidence of an impact was found, no shatter cones, no meteoritic minerals. Later, as scientists studied it more, they realized it was a natural formation, essentially a geologic dome uplifted by volcanic forces long ago and then eroded for millions of years into concentric ridges. The different rings are layers of rock, some harder, some softer, weathering unevenly to create a bullseye pattern in the earth. The Richat Structure's rings span a diameter of about 40 kilometers, 25 miles, as NASA satellites have measured. That's about the size of a major metropolitan city and its suburbs, or as some like to say, the size of Paris. From above, especially from the perspective of space, this formation is strikingly orderly for a product of nature. No wonder astronauts often noted the eye as a landmark. In the blank emptiness of the Sahara, it jumps out, a great swirl of blues, whites, and browns, the colors of various rock types and salts. It almost looks like an enormous fossil snail shell embedded in the desert, or the impression of a giant saucer. Seeing it, one cannot help but think of a planned structure, a design. Now, in our dreamy exploration, we overlay Plato's description onto this peculiar site. 5 rings, alternating water and land, surrounding a central island. The Eye of the Sahara, as it appears today, consists of ring-shaped ridges and valleys. One can imagine, if water were to fill those lower valleys and the higher rings remained as land, it would form a pattern not unlike Atlantis city, ring-shaped waterways encircling land. In fact, when explorers and enthusiasts first got detailed images of Richat, many were astonished at the similarity in form. Could it be a coincidence, or was this a case of nature mirroring myth? The Richat's outer diameter, as mentioned, is roughly 40 kilometers. But interestingly, some measure the inner rings to about 23 kilometers across, in the ballpark of Plato's 127 stadia measurement for the city. Is that precise or just creative counting? Hard to say, but it certainly ignites the imagination. Think of how Plato said Atlantis had mountains to the north. Indeed, just north of the Richat Structure lie ancient hills and plateaus rising above the rings. To the south of the eye, the land opens ultimately towards lower plains and the Atlantic coast, though the coast is a few hundred miles away southwest today. Mauritania's coastlines show evidence of having been inundated by the ocean long ago, and inland from the eye there are dry valleys that once were rivers. If we were to turn back time to the end of the Ice Age, sea levels globally were lower, since a lot of water was locked in glaciers. But as the ice melted, the seas rose rapidly. It's tantalizing to wonder, around 11,600 years ago, the date given by Plato for the flood of Atlantis, the world was undergoing massive climate upheaval. The Sahara was transitioning from a dry Ice Age period to what would become a lush, green Sahara climate. Could cataclysmic floods or rains have swept through this region? Some scientists think that at the end of the Ice Age, sudden sea level jumps and extreme storms did occur as ice caps collapsed. If an Atlantic tsunami or an inland megaflood happened to wash over a low-lying circular plain, well, one could imagine a scenario where a whole city, if one existed there, might be drowned in sediment. Another key correspondence. Atlantis was said to have a river or waterway flowing from it towards the south, through or beside the city, reaching the sea. The Richat Structure, in its present form, doesn't have a flowing river. This is hyper-arid desert now, but around its southern perimeter there are dry channels. More compelling is the evidence from satellite and gravity studies that an enormous ancient river once passed near here. Researchers have identified the outlines of a bygone river system called the Tamanrasset River, which, thousands of years ago during wetter climates, might have been as large as the Nile. This paleo river appears to have collected water from the highlands, even from as far north as the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, and channeled it southward, likely emptying into the Atlantic somewhere on the Mauritanian coast. Some reconstructions of this river's path put tributaries near the area of the Richat Structure. If true, then indeed, during Atlantis's purported time, there could have been a lush river valley skirting the eye's vicinity, and possibly even flooding around it. Plato described a flowing water going out through the rings to the sea. Could the Richat have been situated near a river delta or a large inland lake that connected to the ocean? The Sahara's hidden past is full of long-lost waterways, so the idea isn't far-fetched. Consider also Plato's mention of elephants and rich fauna in Atlantis. The Sahara, shockingly to us now, was once teeming with life. In the green times, elephants, giraffes, hippos, and cattle roamed where today only sand and wind persist. In fact, not far from the eye, prehistoric rock art has been found, showing just that. Engravings of elephants and other animals on rocks in the desert, made by humans who lived there when the climate was kinder. Thousands of burial mounds have been discovered lining the ridges around the Richat, and within its outer ring valleys, archaeologists found stone tools from the Neolithic period, the tail end of the Stone Age, when farming began, and even earlier, stretching back tens of thousands of years. This tells us that humans did live around the eye in the distant past, hunting and perhaps herding animals when water was available. Could some memory of an exceptional place in this region have survived through oral traditions, carried to Egypt or elsewhere? One cannot rule out the pathways of story. They are as winding as rivers and sometimes as enduring as mountains. Geologically, mainstream science says the Richat is about 100 million years old as a structure, far too old to have collapsed suddenly in 10,000 BC. But an Atlantean hypothesis might not require the ground itself to collapse. Rather, an extreme flood or series of events that devastated the civilization and left mud behind. When we examine the soils and sediments within the eye's rings, we find layers of clay, silt, and salt deposits that suggest that parts of it were indeed once playa lakes or marshy. In fact, scientists have found evidence that between roughly 15,000 and 5,000 years ago, a window that brackets the supposed Atlantis destruction date, this area saw significant wet episodes. There were accumulations of sediment from flowing water and even fossil freshwater shells. So imagine, after a long, dry glacial period, rains and rivers returned to the Sahara, filling depressions with water. If at the end of that humid period a catastrophic drought or some other change occurred, those lakes could dry and leave salty, muddy flats. Is it too poetic to think that might correspond to Plato's shoal mud that made a once thriving place unlivable? Perhaps, yet the image resonates. One has to ask, if an advanced city once existed at the Richat Structure, why haven't we found pottery, ruins, or obvious traces? Skeptics point out that no clearly identifiable building foundation or pottery shard has been documented in the innermost circles of the eye. And indeed, archaeologists who've surveyed the site found plentiful stone tools and some signs of ancient habitation around the outer rings and nearby wadis, dry riverbeds. But not a city's ruins. However, the Sahara is a harsh preserver of history. Shifting sands can scour and bury, and thousands of years of wind can erode structures to nothing. If buildings were made of less durable materials, mud, brick or wood, they'd be gone by now. Even stone could be worn down over 10 millennia of sand-blasting winds. And remember that if Atlantis sank in this hypothesis, it might mean it was submerged in water temporarily or hit by waves, which could pulverize structures and scatter them. The remaining question is, where are the pieces? Maybe buried under meters of sediment that have since cemented into crusts. Some suggest the fact that artifacts are scarce in the center is because winds have blown them out, or because any ancient settlement's remains are under layers of hardened mud and salt. Now, as we circle slowly above the sleeping eye of the Sahara, imagine it not as dry land, but as it might have been in its prime. Green concentric islands shining under the sun, ringed by canals or lagoons of water. You might hear the distant echo of water flowing and the laughter of people in a thriving market. Perhaps palm and acacia trees grew along the banks, and farm fields sprawled on the plains beyond. Perhaps the rings were partially man-made too, enhanced by Atlantean engineers who saw this natural circular formation as an ideal template for their city and sculpted it further. It's a romantic vision, certainly. One could paint a beautiful mental picture of Atlantis at Richat, mountains with waterfalls to the north, the highlands wringing rain from humid air, sending cascades down. A rich plain extending hundreds of miles, the area that is now flat Hamada Desert, once grassland, and the great river or even a shallow sea bay to the south where ships could sail to and from the city. It gives me a little shiver, a mix of awe and melancholy to stand, in our imagination, on the central island of the eye as dawn breaks, picturing it as it may have been if Atlantis lived here. The rings of water glint golden with sunrise, and beyond them the desert stretches, verdant and alive in that bygone age. Now fast forward in your mind, dark clouds gathering, the ground trembling. Perhaps a series of massive quakes strikes. Mauritania does have faults, though it's not very seismic today. But who knows in the past? The land could crack, releasing underground water, or even causing land to subside. If the coastline was nearby, maybe a monstrous wave came roaring inland. Plato's account speaks of earthquakes and floods together, a 1-2 punch of nature. We can almost hear the panicked cries, the sudden roar of water, the great eye filling with churning brown floodwaters, swirling and smashing everything in their path. In a single night of terror, the grand city could be broken and drowned. And as the waters receded, they left behind a muddy swamp where once stood shining walls, a place now cursed and uninhabitable, slowly drying into salt flats. The survivors, if any, would flee, never to return, passing down the memory of the cataclysm, which, after many retellings and centuries, ends up in an Egyptian temple story, then to Solon, and ultimately to Plato. Could it be true? Or is this all a desert mirage of the mind? The eye of the Sahara has no voice to confirm or deny. It just gazes silently upward, holding its enigma. Some modern investigators have visited the Richat and found oddities like smooth, circular stone fragments that might be interpreted as ancient artifacts, or just as natural concretions. Others claim to have found evidence of a spillway to the southwest of the eye, as if water once breached out that direction towards the ocean, matching the tail of an opening to the sea. But again, mainstream geologists see nothing unusual in those features beyond normal erosion. As often happens with great mysteries, what you find depends largely on what you're looking for. Nonetheless, the eye has captured the imagination of many, and not without reason. It is as if the Earth herself has left a fingerprint here, one that coincidentally, or not, aligns with a mythical lost city's blueprint. Perhaps it's only that, a grand coincidence that inspired a theory. Or perhaps those ancient storytellers of Sais in Egypt knew something more tangible, something passed down from travelers or ancestors about a wondrous circular city far to the west that met a tragic fate. Let's take a gentle breath and step back now. We have seen the eye revealed. We have matched it to Plato's blueprint in tantalizing ways. It stands before us as a possible Atlantis candidate, bearing physical similarities and sitting in a part of the world that, though now barren, was once full of life, and sits just outside the Pillars of Hercules by a certain interpretation. As you relax deeper, your mind might be weaving together the threads, myth, clue, place, into a tapestry of possibility. It's a lovely tapestry, shimmering in the dim light of speculation. Yet, to truly approach truth, or as close as we can in a bedtime story, we must gather more context. If Atlantis was here, or anywhere, why has evidence been so elusive? Are there more hints in ancient maps or writings we haven't considered? And what of those who say such evidence has been deliberately hidden or overlooked? In our next chapter, we shall listen to whispers of old charts and forbidden maps that may hold pieces of the puzzle, guiding us further on our tranquil quest for the sunken continent. Chapter 4. Ancient Echoes in the Desert. The desert is a keeper of memories. Though it seems empty and still, the Sahara holds echoes of a time when it was young and green. As you drift in the comfort of your pillow, imagine the sands around the eye of the Sahara stirring with faint apparitions. Footprints of those who walked here before the dunes, voices carried on a moist breeze that hasn't blown here in ages. These are the ancient echoes in the desert, remnants of a world that might give credence to Atlantis' story. Today, the Sahara is the world's largest hot desert, arid, formidable, an apparent wasteland. But it wasn't always so. Close your eyes and picture the Sahara of 12,000 years ago. The great ice sheets of the north were melting, the world was warming, and seasonal rains were shifting. In North Africa, the desolation began blossoming into grassland and savanna. Year by year, century by century, plants took root and lakes filled, and the desert transformed into what is known as the Green Sahara, or African Humid Period. Between roughly 10,000 BC and 5,000 BC, much of the Sahara was habitable and even hospitable. We know this because science has uncovered tangible evidence. Fossil pollen and seeds beneath the sand that tell of cattails, water lilies, and grasses. Ancient lake beds and river channels visible in radar and satellite imagery, painting a ghostly hydrography across the barren plains. And wonderfully, rock art and carvings left on stone outcrops, depicting giraffes wading in wetlands, hunters pursuing hippos, cattle grazing. Scenes of life that could not exist in a desert. One of the most famous areas of this prehistoric art is far to the east of the eye, in the Tassili Niger Mountains of Algeria. There, high on plateau walls, are paintings thousands of years old showing people swimming, dancing, and herding cattle. Another site, the Akakas Range in Libya, similarly has images of elephants, rhinos, and even mysterious human figures with round heads, almost alien-looking in their stylization, performing what might be ritual dances. These images are echoes of the time when the Sahara was alive. And crucially, they show that people thrived in what is now desert. These were likely pastoral and nomadic peoples. Did they build cities or large towns? The evidence so far suggests a mostly nomadic lifestyle, but who's to say there weren't a few special places, perhaps settlements near reliable water sources, that grew larger? As the climate allowed, humans could have congregated in fertile regions of the Sahara just as they did along the Nile or in Mesopotamia. Picture the area around the Richat Structure during that humid epoch. It sits on a plateau, but to its west and southwest studies have revealed the presence of ancient megalakes and river systems. In nearby northern Mali, for example, there was once a Lake Megachad, and other enormous lakes whose shorelines are now traced by lines of ancient beach sediment. Imagine an inland delta or broad lake lapping not far from the eye, an oasis on a grand scale. We know that in the Adrar region of Mauritania, where the eye is located, archaeologists have found remnants of Stone Age cultures. Tools chipped from quartzite, arrowheads and scraping implements, beads, and hearths. They've also found those thousands of burial mounds we mentioned earlier. These mounds, scattered along the ridges of the eye and nearby, are basically tombs built of piled stones. Their age is uncertain without extensive excavation, but some might date to several thousand years ago when the climate was just beginning to dry out. Even as the land became more arid after 5000 BC, people did not give it up immediately. They adapted for a while, lingering near remaining waterholes. The burials suggest a society that had ritual practices and possibly stratification, for labor was in Tansun Kamaita Beni. Bailed tomb. Masons. All these echoes in the desert tell us one clear thing. The Sahara was not always an empty quarter. It was once full of life and, by extension, could have nurtured forgotten cultures. Sometimes I think of the Sahara as a great stage where civilizations could have risen and fallen with the rhythms of the climate, leaving behind only the faintest trace for us to find. There's a particularly evocative local legend from the far side of the Sahara about a lost city called Zerzura, the oasis of little birds, spoken of in medieval Arabic chronicles. Explorers in the 20th century were bewitched by it and went searching deep into the desert of Egypt and Libya. The legend described Zerzura as a white city of riches, hidden in the sands, guarded by black giants, where a sleeping king and queen awaited a rescuer. While Zerzura was never found, and likely it was a fable or a garbled memory of smaller oases, the very existence of such legends highlights a theme. The desert inspires tales of lost cities. One can't help but wonder if similar stories existed among desert nomads in Mauritania or Morocco. Perhaps tales of a once great settlement swallowed by shifting dunes or dried up lakes. We may not have those on record as clearly as Zerzura, but the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, as they say. The silence of the Sahara might itself be an echo, an intentional hush over something that's meant to stay lost. Suppressed evidence, which we will discuss in the next chapter, might include hints that have popped up and then been stifled. But in terms of natural echoes, consider this. In recent years, scientists using satellite imaging detected unnatural-looking patterns beneath the sand in certain areas of the Sahara. For example, square and circular outlines suggestive of man-made structures have been spotted in Sudan and southern Egypt, later confirmed as ancient forts, villages, or necropolises once covered by sand. Could similar hidden patterns lie near the eye of the Sahara? The region is so remote and seldom visited by archaeologists that it's possible there are buried ruins not yet noticed. If one were to fly low with ground-penetrating radar or LiDAR imaging over the eye's innermost depressions, who knows what small anomalies might appear? Perhaps foundations or walls now buried? Until such an exploration is done, the question lingers, softly, like the faintest whisper in a night breeze. What remains undiscovered beneath the Sahara's sands? We also have the echo of names and languages. Earlier we touched on Atlas and Atlantis. It might intrigue you to know that some Berber tribes of North Africa have myths of ancestral islands or lands now gone. And moving to another continent, this is a bit lateral but fascinating, across the Atlantic, the ancient Maya and Aztec spoke of an ancestral place called Aztlan for the Aztec, or Atlan in some legends, a land to the east, across the water, from which their people came. The name Atlan is eerily reminiscent of Atlantis. Some scholars think it's just coincidence, or that Spanish chroniclers rephrased native words to sound classical, but others have raised an eyebrow. Could there have been a cultural ripple so long ago that even across the ocean, a memory of Atlan survived in a new form? It might be purely coincidental, but it shows how widespread the sound and idea of Atlantis Atlan is. Even in the name of the Atlantic Ocean itself, we carry an echo of Atlantis every day. Echoes of a lost race, Atlanteans, or whoever they might have been, can also be interpreted through mysterious out-of-place artifacts around the world. For instance, consider the impressive stone structures that don't quite fit their time. There's Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a ceremonial stone complex dated to about 9600 BC, again, right around the end of the Ice Age. That's millennia before Stonehenge or the pyramids, yet it was made by people who had to have organization and knowledge to carve and erect huge stone pillars decorated with animals. Mainstream archaeology attributes it to early farming communities, but the timing and complexity astonished scholars. Who taught them to build like that? Some fringe theorists like to imagine it was built by survivors or contemporaries of an Atlantean civilization dispersed after a cataclysm. It's speculation, of course, but a warm, drowsy kind of speculation that invites, what if? Then there is Nabta Playa, deep in Egypt's desert, a stone circle and evidence of perhaps one of the world's earliest known astronomically aligned structures, roughly 7,000 plus years old. Not as old as Atlantis, but older than the Egyptian pyramids by far, and located in what's now a very inhospitable place. It shows that early Africans had sophisticated knowledge of the stars and seasons to arrange stones marking solstices and such, a precursor to later monuments, and possibly an inheritance of knowledge from even earlier times. All these are echoes, faint signs that humanity's story has hidden chapters. They may not directly scream, Atlantis was here, but they collectively say something more was going on in prehistory than we once assumed. The Sahara's own hidden chapter might include an advanced culture, or at least a uniquely developed society that simply could not survive the changing environment. Think for a moment about what it means that the Sahara went from lush to desert. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, though punctuated by some abrupt shifts. As rains moved southward and became seasonal, lakes began to dry, and vegetation receded. By around 3000 BC, the Sahara was largely hyper-arid as we know it today. The people who had lived there either migrated to better watered areas, many likely moved toward the Nile Valley, contributing to the rise of Egyptian civilization, or they adapted by becoming full desert nomads. If a mythical Atlantis-like city had prospered there, its people might have gone on an exodus. Is it a coincidence that ancient Egypt's civilization blossoms right after the Sahara's great drying? Possibly not. Some have theorized that the Nile Valley's sudden growth was fed by an influx of populations from the Sahara, bringing cattle herding, artistic styles, maybe spiritual ideas. Could the survivors of Atlantis, if we imagine Atlantis in Sahara, have bolstered the ranks of Nile societies? Pure conjecture, but a dreamy one. That the wisdom of a lost city found refuge by the Nile, morphing into the legends of gods and Zep Tepi, the first time that Egyptians later recorded. The Egyptian priests did say the story of Atlantis came from their forefathers. So many echoes, my friend, swirling around in the desert night. They are like fragments of a song, half remembered. You catch a note here, a note there. In this gentle exploration, we don't need to force them into a clear picture. It is enough to recognize that the Sahara holds secrets, and the world beyond the Pillars of Hercules was not a total void of culture in those grey mists of prehistory. If Atlantis truly did exist, the Sahara during the Green Period is one of the few places on Earth that could accommodate a civilization advanced for its time outside the well-known cradles of Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley or China, which all developed much later. Isn't that an intriguing thought to lull yourself with? That under the quiet sands, an epic story may be sleeping? As we listen to the last echoes fade, a new theme emerges, one of secrecy and forbidden knowledge. Why haven't we learned more about these possibilities? Perhaps because evidence is scant, or perhaps because some evidence was found and then covered up, dismissed, or kept out of sight. The notion that knowledge of Atlantis or similar lost worlds might have been suppressed by authorities or circumstances is itself an alluring mystery. Let us drift onward then into the territory of forbidden maps and suppressed evidence, where we'll consider whether clues to Atlantis have been deliberately hidden or overlooked, and why that might be. Keep your mind open and your heart calm. We tread now into realms where history and conspiracy mingle, softly and speculatively, perfect for a midnight musing. Chapter 5. The Forbidden Maps. Maps are more than ink on parchment. They are repositories of knowledge, dreams, and sometimes secrets. In the age before satellite GPS and Google Earth, maps were precious, often guarded, and occasionally fantastical. To imagine Atlantis, we might ask, did any maps hint at lands now lost? If pieces of Atlantis' story survived, perhaps a cartographer, somewhere, sometime, drew something they shouldn't logically have known. Welcome to the world of forbidden maps, where ancient and medieval charts tease us with possibilities that mainstream history struggles to explain. One of the most renowned examples, which we touched upon in our Antarctic tale and shall briefly revisit from a different angle, is the Piri Reis map of 1513. Compiled by an Ottoman admiral, this map astonished 20th century scholars by showing the west coast of Africa, the east coast of South America, and a large landmass in the far south that some interpret as Antarctica's coast without its ice. But how could a 16th century map include details of Antarctica, which wasn't officially discovered until 1820 AD, and especially its subglacial topography? Piri Reis himself annotated that he used about 20 source maps, some from ancient times, perhaps even from the Library of Alexandria or other lost collections, to draw his world chart. Could one of those sources have been a map from a civilization that sailed the seas eons ago? Some enthusiasts believed so, proposing that Atlanteans or other ancient seafarers charted the globe long before the known civilizations, and that fragments of those charts passed down through the ages. While Antarctica is far afield from Atlantis' supposed realm, the principle is tantalizing. Ancient source maps might preserve glimpses of a very different world picture. Let's bring the focus back to Atlantis proper. Is there a map that explicitly shows something like Atlantis? Indeed, there is a curious one from a Renaissance scholar who took Plato very seriously. Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit polymath of the 17th century, published a famous map of Atlantis in 1665. In his book Mundus Subterraneus, The Subterranean World, Kircher presented a bold map titled Situs Insulae Atlantidis, the site of the island of Atlantis. This map, interestingly, is drawn with south at the top, so it looks upside down to our eyes. It situates a large island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, spanning roughly from Spain's latitude down to the equator, and about a third of the width of the ocean. On it, Kircher labelled mountains and rivers, and placed the letters Atlantis prominently. He noted on the side, in Latin, that this map was drawn from ancient Egyptian charts of the legendary island, implying Kircher believed he had access to old knowledge, or at least old narratives about Atlantis' geography. Now, Kircher's Atlantis map might not be forbidden in the sense of being hidden. He published it, after all. But it was certainly unorthodox for his time. He was effectively saying, yes, Atlantis was real. Here it is, look. Many contemporaries were skeptical or ignored it. And later, as science advanced, Kircher's map was relegated to a historical curiosity. But what if Kircher was onto something? He proposed, for example, that the Canary Islands and the Azores were high mountain peaks of Atlantis that remained above water after the rest sank. This idea wasn't unique to him. Since the late 1500s, scholars like Sir Francis Bacon and others had speculated similarly, noting that those Atlantic islands might be remnants of a larger sunken land. Kircher's map effectively bridged myth with geography, trying to give Atlantis a legitimate place on Earth's stage. Of course, geologists today will tell you no large continent sank in the Atlantic in the last 12,000 years. There's no evidence in the seafloor. But Kircher's map keeps inspiring because it suggests he believed there were credible ancient sources. Was there perhaps a now lost ancient world map in the archives of the Vatican or some private collection that Kircher consulted? One enticing but unverified story claims that Kircher found a map of Atlantis in a Roman or Egyptian artifact and simply copied it. If such an artifact existed, it's since vanished from public knowledge. That is where the forbidden aspect might enter. If the church or other authorities had evidence of a pre-biblical advanced civilization, Atlantis, would they suppress it? In past centuries, information that didn't fit the established worldview, especially the biblical timeline of history, could be considered dangerous. Atlantis, with its time frame of 9600 BC, predates the creation date as calculated by medieval theologians, 4000 BC, quite heretical to entertain back then. So any real maps or documents hinting at such antiquity might have been tucked away to avoid controversy. The Herodotus map rumor is another intriguing snippet. The Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC described much of the known world, including parts of Africa. He did mention the Atlantes tribe in Libya, but not a sunken island. However, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, some attempts were made to reconstruct Herodotus's world map based on his writings. One such reconstruction, drawn much later, long after Herodotus, shows a big lake or sea in the middle of the Sahara with a label that some misread as Atlantis. In truth, it might have been labeling Atlantes people near Mount Atlas, but through the haze of copying and conjecture, a myth arose that an ancient map placed Atlantis in the Sahara. This was amplified by some alternative researchers who claimed a 500 BC map clearly showed Atlantis exactly where the Richat is. As seductive as that sounds, it appears to be more modern myth-making than fact, a case of the wish being father to the thought. Nonetheless, it highlights how certain maps, if taken out of context or misinterpreted, can seed entire theories. The idea of a forbidden map showing Atlantis in Africa spread on the internet, often with an image of a crude, old-looking map with Atlantis written in the Sahara. It turns out to be a mix-up, but it captured imaginations. One can't help but muse, if one false map can do that, what if a real such map were found? Speaking of truly forbidden or lost maps, in the early 1500s, there was said to be a globe made by cartographer Martin Waldseemüller that had an inscription about Atlantis. Waldseemüller, famous for naming America on his 1507 world map, supposedly created a globe in 1516, now lost, where he noted a region in the Atlantic with the site of the lost island of Atlantis, according to the ancients. This little anecdote, if true, shows that educated people of the Renaissance didn't entirely dismiss Atlantis. It was part of the geographical discussions. If that globe still existed, it might be considered a forbidden piece now, since it acknowledges Atlantis as if factual. We only know of it through a later reference, so it remains an intriguing ghost of cartography. Then, going further back, we have an ancient map that's not of Earth at all, but rather a star map, yet it relates to Atlantis in a roundabout way. Some esoteric traditions claim that Atlanteans had knowledge of the stars and Earth's dimensions far beyond what primitive humans should. A peculiar artifact known as the Piri race map, again, or others like the Dendera zodiac in Egypt, or the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek orrery calendar, hint at advanced astronomy in antiquity. If Atlanteans preserved such knowledge and it filtered down, some maps of the heavens or world grid might have Atlantean roots. There are fringe theories about a global grid of energy or ley lines, with ancient sites aligned, like the Great Pyramid, Machu Picchu, etc., all aligning on certain great circles. A few even call that the Atlantean grid map, an idea that a map of Earth's energy or geometry was known to a lost civilization. While conventional science doesn't endorse this, it's a hypnotic idea, that the perfection of certain ancient constructions implies they were following a blueprint handed from an earlier time. Let's also consider Portolan charts, medieval sailing maps of the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Some show islands that no longer exist. For example, old maps sometimes have an island called Antilia, origin of the word Antilles, in the Atlantic. A rectangular island supposedly discovered by Portuguese sailors or imagined by them, often dated on maps around the 15th century. Antilia was placed about where the Azores are, and legend had it that it was the island of the 7 cities, where bishops fled during the Muslim conquest of Iberia. Pure legend turning into cartography, but some speculate it might echo a distant memory of a real sunken land. Also, maps often showed Brazil, nothing to do with the country Brazil, a phantom island in the Atlantic west of Ireland, and High Brazil, a mythical Celtic island said to appear once every 7 years. These phantom isles can be seen as folklore, or missed sightings of fog banks, or perhaps real small islands that later sank due to volcanism. The Atlantic has the Azores Plateau, volcanic, and possibly had more islands that eroded or sank. To a romantic mind, each of these phantom islands could be a puzzle piece of a broken-up Atlantis, still barely remembered by sailors. The maps of Mercator, the famous 16th century cartographer, also included something curious at the North Pole: a large island or landmass and a sea draining inward. Some tied that to legends of a northern Atlantis or Thule. It's likely Mercator was compiling sailor tales, but it shows how in that era, map makers were including things from ancient lore freely. Now, in a hushed tone, let's ponder. If we or someone were to find a genuinely old map, say carved on stone or encoded in myth, that clearly depicts Atlantis' location and shape, what would happen? It might upend the academic consensus. Possibly, just possibly, there have been finds along these lines that were not recognized or were dismissed to avoid rewriting textbooks. We know that throughout history, occasionally discoveries were kept quiet for political or religious reasons. Think of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which some claim had controversial texts held back for decades, or the Gospel of Thomas kept apocryphal. In a similar vein, if, for instance, a cache of scrolls from ancient Alexandria survived with a map of Atlantis or records of it, one can imagine they might languish in the vaults of a museum, too sensational to release without causing a stir. The term forbidden maps thus casts a spell of conspiracy. Perhaps secret societies or select scholars possessed knowledge of global geography from an Atlantean legacy that they guarded. The Knights Templar or Masons are often woven into these theories. For example, did the Templars have ancient charts that helped them sail to the New World before Columbus? Some think so. If they did, maybe those charts came from a repository of ancient knowledge. Maybe from Atlantis or its heirs. It's a speculative leap, but our journey is speculative by design, and oh so gently thrilling to consider while snug under the blankets. Let me share a final little anecdote. In 1665, a French scholar named Jean Bailly, much later, 18th century, postulated that Atlantis had been a real northern land. He thought near Iceland, Greenland, and that its people fled south to start Egyptian and Inca civilizations. He claimed they had left behind advanced knowledge encoded in myths, and yes, maps of the stars. Napoleon Bonaparte was fascinated by this and took scholars to Egypt, in part influenced by ideas of ancient global knowledge. It's said that when Napoleon's men were in the Great Pyramid, they found something, we don't know what, but some wild accounts claim they found inscriptions or items in a hidden chamber, which were swiftly collected and sent off, never to be shown. Could that have been a map of sorts, maybe a star map or a diagram of lost lands? The truth is lost to history, but it tickles the imagination. Even the conquering Napoleon might have encountered forbidden knowledge and kept it secret. In the comforting darkness now, we can imagine an old leather map, its edges charred by time, rolled up in a cedar chest hidden in some monastery or archive. On it, drawn in fading inks, is a depiction of a mighty circular city by a sea, annotated in an indecipherable script. No one alive knows of it, except perhaps a lone librarian who wonders if it's just myth. Perhaps in some quiet future dawn, a young researcher will stumble on it and the world will awaken to Atlantis confirmed. Until then, these maps remain forbidden not by locks and keys, but by obscurity and skepticism. Our minds have roamed far and wide with these maps. They lead us through what could have been and perhaps what was. But now, returning focus, think of the eye of the Sahara again, and imagine overlaying Kirch's Atlantis outline onto it instead of in the mid-Atlantic. Does it fit? Maybe not perfectly, but with a little creativity, one can see how an early mapmaker might have mispositioned something real in the wrong ocean. The ancients did speak of Libya and Asia, Africa and Asia Minor, being adjacent to Atlantis. Maybe that was a clue its remains were part of Africa all along. No map yet has definitively led us to Atlantis, but pieces of maps, anomalies, and ancient charts inspire the quest. As we fold away our imaginary forbidden maps, we prepare to delve into the notion of suppressed evidence more broadly. for maps are just one form of evidence. There are also artifacts, bones, structures, things that might have been found and then hidden or dismissed because they don't fit our current paradigm. Let's step softly into that realm, continuing our gentle search for truth beneath the sands of time. Chapter 6. Suppressed evidence. Sometimes what we seek is not entirely lost. It's just kept out of sight. In hushed corridors of museums, in unpublished papers, or in whispered anecdotes among locals, there may lie suppressed evidence of something extraordinary. If Atlantis once existed, even if 11,000 years have passed, we might expect some trace to have surfaced by now. And indeed, over the years, tantalizing finds have sparked waves of speculation, only to be dismissed or quietly forgotten. Let's examine a few of these, letting curiosity guide us, but always in our calm, dreamy manner, without judgment or haste. Consider the Richat Structure itself, our Eye of the Sahara. One might think that if anyone truly suspected it as Atlantis' remains, there would have been extensive archaeological digs there. But oddly, very little in-depth excavation has been done at Richat. The reasons could be logistical, it's very remote and harsh, with little funding for such a fringe idea, or scientific. Mainstream archaeologists see no clear sign of a man-made city there. However, a more conspiratorial angle wonders, what if a preliminary investigation found something intriguing, but it was stifled? For instance, there are unconfirmed stories that decades ago, when French explorers and geologists like Théodore Monod in the 1970s were surveying the area, they found anomalous artifacts, like carved stones that didn't match known local prehistoric cultures, or even a hint of a structure's foundation. These claims never made it into formal publications, possibly because nothing conclusive could be drawn, or perhaps because it would attract pseudo-archaeology that academia tries to avoid. It's also said that some artifacts from Richat, like those Achillean hand axes and later arrowheads, were carted off to universities and then sat unstudied in basements, as often happens with too many artifacts, not enough analysts. In that mundane bureaucracy, evidence can languish, effectively suppressed by neglect. Then there's the modern anecdote from 1965 mentioned earlier, the CIA's interest in Richat. Yes, during the Cold War, the US intelligence had a program looking for potential geomagnetic anomalies around the world, perhaps hoping to locate mineral deposits or even underground facilities. The Richat Structure was one of the sites they flew over with special instruments. The Freedom of Information Act revealed a memo about it, but when released, it had redacted sections, portions blacked out. Now why, one might wonder, would the results from a geological survey be classified? The benign answer, it might mention something sensitive about technology or national security. The exciting answer, maybe they detected something unexpected beneath Richat, say a hollow or metallic readings, that they deemed too perplexing or secret to reveal. Could there be a buried ruin or something giving off unusual magnetic readings under those concentric circles? The imagination runs wild with that thought. Of course, we have no proof of what was in those blacked out lines, but it's enough to make a dreamer raise an eyebrow. Suppressed evidence of Atlantis might not only come from the Sahara. For example, consider the story of Bimini Road. In 1968, off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas, divers found an underwater formation of large rectangular limestone blocks, looking much like a paved road. The find electrified believers in Atlantis because Edgar Cayce, a famous American mystic, had predicted in the 1930s that remnants of Atlantis would be found near Bimini in 1968 or 1969. A startlingly precise and timely prophecy. For a while, some thought this road was indeed part of Atlantis' harbour works or a temple foundation, now submerged after sea levels rose. Mainstream geologists, however, have identified Bimini Road as likely a natural beach rock formation, broken into blocky shapes and aligned by currents. But whispers persist that some features, like alleged stone pillars or circular structures also found nearby, were quietly removed or not publicised. Perhaps to prevent a frenzy of wild speculation or protect the site from treasure hunters, details were downplayed. could it be that some archaeologist dredged up a worked tool or artifact from under the sands near Bimini Road and it never made the news? We don't know. Yet, that location and timing are eerily on target with Case's Atlantis prophecy, leaving one to wonder if more was found that summer and quietly archived. Edgar Case himself is a trove of suppressed Atlantis lore. The Sleeping Prophet, as he was called, gave readings in trance that spoke of Atlantean high technology, crystal energy, flying airships, and said records of Atlantis exist in a hidden chamber under the paw of the Great Sphinx at Giza, and another in the Sunken Temple of Poseidon, somewhere in the Bahamas. The Egyptian government has done seismic scans around the Sphinx, and some have claimed they detected cavities under the monument. Notably, in the 1990s, researchers Dr. Robert Schoch and John Anthony West brought attention to the possibility of a chamber under the Sphinx, distinct from known tunnels. The Egyptian authorities, however, have been very conservative about excavating around the Sphinx, partly to preserve it and partly, perhaps, to avoid stirring controversy. Some fringe theorists suspect that the Egyptian Antiquities Department actually did explore a bit and found something interesting, maybe scrolls or artifacts, and decided not to announce it, fearing it would upend history as we know it or invite problematic groups. It's speculation, but intriguing. If an Atlantean Hall of Records is truly there, it would be the most suppressed evidence of all time. Back to the Sahara. There are legends among some Sahara tribes of ancient cities now swallowed by sands. Occasionally, these are not just oral tales. Explorers have found ruins in the desert that locals were long aware of, but the outside world wasn't. For instance, the ruins of Jardo in Niger or the Garamantes cities in Libya, with their ingenious Foggara irrigation tunnels, were essentially lost until the 20th century. When found, they revealed that a complex civilization thrived in the Sahara 1500 to 2000 years ago, then vanished as climate worsened. Those weren't Atlantis, but they serve as proof that vanished cities in deserts are a real phenomenon, not just a fantasy. It lends credence to the idea that something older could lie buried, not yet stumbled upon. Satellite archaeology, using high-res images to spot buried structures, has been booming. It identified rivers and even human-made structures under the sand in various parts of Sahara. If a geometric anomaly was spotted near Richat or elsewhere hinting at a buried ruin, would that be publicized or kept quiet until verified? Possibly the latter, to avoid wild speculation. By the time it's verified, if it turned out earth-shaking, this ruin is 9,000 years old and advanced. Those in charge might decide not to make a splash immediately. I can imagine the internal monologue. Better to study this thoroughly first, piece by piece, and not incite the world with talk of Atlantis. Another category of suppressed evidence might be out-of-place artifacts, OOP arts. Scattered reports exist of objects that don't fit their geological or historical context. E.g., a metal sphere found in a 2.8 billion-year-old rock seam in South Africa, or spark plug-like devices in lumps of coal, or that famous Antikythera mechanism, which wasn't suppressed, but was so surprising it took decades to accept it was an ancient Greek analog computer from 200 BC. Many of these OOP-arts are debunked or contested, but some remain unexplained. If one credible artifact turned up that was clearly from, say, 10,000 BC, but showing advanced craftsmanship, it might be quietly shelved as, we must have mistaken the layer it came from, or maybe a recent intrusion. The narrative of history is strong, and evidence that threatens to rewrite it often faces extra scrutiny, as it should, and sometimes undue dismissal. Take the case of Göbekli Tepe I mentioned earlier, when it was first discovered in the mid-1990s in Turkey, showing advanced stone carving and architecture from 10,000 plus years ago, long before cities or metal tools according to orthodoxy. Archaeologists themselves were shocked. That discovery wasn't suppressed. It got published and studied. Yet even now, its implications are so profound that scholars tread carefully in interpreting it. Some initially downplayed it. Oh, maybe it's not that old, or maybe it was a one-off site. Now with more evidence, they accept it truly is that old and complex, which nudges the window of complex societies back by several thousand years. The point is, even without malice, evidence that challenges our timeline can be mentally suppressed simply by the reluctance of experts to believe what they're seeing at first. Human nature leans conservative in paradigm shifts. Now let's turn to an even more imaginative angle: aliens and Atlantis. We'll explore the alien theory soon, but here consider, if evidence emerged that Atlantis had, say, electricity or machinery or something wild that hints at otherworldly help, that could be doubly suppressed. Many believe governments have hidden evidence of UFOs for years. Similarly, would they hide evidence of an ancient high-tech civilization? Possibly, fearing it'd destabilize our understanding of human origins or conflict with religious doctrines. Some conspiracy circles suggest exactly that Smithsonian and other museums hide giant skeletons to keep history neat. There are indeed 19th century accounts of giant bones unearthed in the Americas that supposedly vanished after being sent to the Smithsonian, fueling legends of a cover-up of giants, which some tie to Atlanteans or Nephilim. It's hard to verify these claims, but they form part of the law of suppression. At this gentle hour, let's entertain one story. In the early 20th century, an American newspaperman named James Churchward claimed he was shown ancient tablets in India that told of a lost continent called Mu, sometimes conflated with Atlantis, which sank in the Pacific. He wrote books about this lost land and its advanced people. The actual tablets, however, were never produced for other scholars. Supposedly they were secret and kept by a priestly order. Many dismissed Churchward's story as fantasy, but what if there was a kernel of truth? That some ancient records of lost continents do exist in monastery archives, too sacred or bizarre to reveal. It sends a little chill of excitement down one's spine to think that dusty scrolls in Tibet or sealed papyri in the Vatican secret archives may mention Atlantis by name. If so, they've been effectively suppressed by being inaccessible to the public, albeit for perhaps understandable reasons. Bringing our thoughts back to the eye of the Sahara, I sometimes wonder if perhaps a few artifacts found there, say a carved symbol or unusual pottery fragment, might lie in a drawer in Nouakchot's museum or in Paris from colonial expeditions, unrecognized for what they are. If someone identified an Egyptian or Mediterranean object in the Sahara context far earlier than known trade, it might hint at contacts with a lost civilization bridging those worlds. The lack of academic interest might suppress it inadvertently. That's often how suppression works in science, not via nefarious intent, but via disinterest. It can't be, so it isn't. Let's move on. Yet, some suppression could be intentional. Imagine if a corporate or political interest feared that discovering Atlantis would lead to upheaval or damage to national pride. For example, if Plato's tale of a war in which Athens beat Atlantis turned out to have some truth, maybe some nation's ancient glory is at stake. Or perhaps there's fear it'd attract a circus of treasure hunters to a vulnerable region, the way Egypt's pyramids suffered looting. In those cases, authorities might quietly discourage Atlantis research, deny permits, not fund it, etc. That's subtle suppression. In our soft exploration tonight, we won't point fingers at shadowy cabals, but we acknowledge that evidence of the extraordinary often faces an uphill battle to be acknowledged. This is neither good nor bad. It's human caution. But it does mean that if pieces of Atlantis have appeared, they may not have been recognized or celebrated yet. Now, after considering that what we seek might be deliberately or accidentally hidden, we stand at a threshold of speculation where one must ask, if not humans, did someone else have a hand in these ancient wonders? The next chapter beckons, hinting that perhaps Atlantis' achievements and demise might involve not just human hands, but something cosmic or alien. It's a controversial and fantastical idea, but in the quiet safety of a bedtime story, we can entertain even that with a whimsical, open mind. So let's proceed, floating onward into the realm of the alien architect theory, keeping our tone gentle and wonder alive. Chapter 7. The Alien Architect Theory. Could it be that Atlantis was more than just human ingenuity? As we drift into this more fanciful chapter, imagine looking up at a star-studded sky above the lost city, and wondering if someone out there lent a guiding hand to its rise. The alien architect theory posits that either Atlantis was influenced by extraterrestrial visitors or perhaps was an extraterrestrial outpost itself. It's a notion that tiptoes into science fiction, yet many ancient astronaut theorists and even some legends across cultures flirt with the idea that beings from the heavens played roles in early civilizations. In our soft exploration, we won't assert it as truth, but we'll imagine what if, with that same curious, dreamy tone. Plato described Atlantis as extraordinarily advanced for its time, boasting things like complex engineering, canals, triremes, ships, and a giant temple with a pillar of orichalcum engraved with laws. If we assume for a moment the story was based on some reality, how did a civilization that early, supposedly 11,000 plus years ago, get so advanced? One answer: they figured it out themselves over millennia lost to history. Another, more unorthodox answer: they had help from others who had already mastered such arts. Many mythologies talk of culture bringers or civilizing gods that come from afar. In ancient Mesopotamia, the tales speak of Oannes, a fish-bodied being who emerged from the sea to teach humanity writing, science, and law. Some think Oannes could be a memory of an Atlantean survivor, or even an alien. In Mesoamerican lore, there is Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, to the Maya, the feathered serpent god who came from across the sea or from the sky and taught the people calendar making, agriculture, etc., before departing with a promise to return. Viracocha in the Andes, similarly, was a tall, bearded god who appeared after a great flood to help humanity, then left across the waters. These stories echo strangely with Atlantis, a great flood or cataclysm, followed by knowledge-bearing figures travelling around. Could the survivors of Atlantis, with their advanced knowledge, have been seen as gods by less developed peoples? Certainly possible. But some of the legends frame these beings as non-human, sometimes explicitly from the stars. The Dogon tribe in Mali, not too far from our Sahara focal point, famously have detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system they shouldn't have without telescopes, including that Sirius has a companion star, which is invisible to naked eye, only confirmed by astronomers in 19th-20th century. The Dogons say that knowledge came from amphibious visitors they call Nomo, who came from the sky, specifically from Sirius. While some researchers debate the accuracy of this story, it's often cited in ancient alien discussions. If true, it implies contact with extraterrestrials in antiquity. Now, if amphibious star beings landed anywhere in Africa to share knowledge, a coastal or island civilization like Atlantis, if it existed on an Atlantic shore or island, could have been a logical place given its prominence. Pure speculation, but fun to consider. Maybe Atlanteans got a technological leg up from friendly cosmic visitors. Another angle is that Atlanteans themselves might have been partly alien, either descendants of spacefaring refugees who colonized Earth in prehistory, or humans with alien genetic influence. These ideas are found in Theosophy and some New Age thought, where Atlanteans are sometimes described as possessing psychic powers, flying machines called Vimanas in some texts, especially from Indian epics, even crystals that could channel energy in ways we cannot now. If one reads the ancient Indian Mahabharata or Ramayana, there are startling descriptions of flying chariots and devastating iron thunderbolts and columns of smoke and flame that sound eerily like modern aerial warfare or even nuclear blasts. Some have speculated those are memories of Atlantean conflicts or the doings of gods/aliens that humans recorded. The destruction of Atlantis, by some occult accounts, was not just a natural disaster, but perhaps an accident or war involving powerful energy, something akin to nuclear technology, which, if true, might hint at otherworldly involvement because that's far beyond known human capability of the time. Atlantis's fabled orichalcum metal, second only to gold, is often depicted in pseudo-scientific lore as having special properties, maybe an extraterrestrial alloy. Curiously, modern analysis suggests orichalcum in Plato's context might have been a brass-like alloy of copper and zinc, which was indeed rare in antiquity. But imagination wants it to be something more exotic, like an alien metal that stores energy. If aliens had a hand in human civilization, one wonders why Atlantis? Perhaps, if we imagine a star-faring species monitoring Earth, they might choose a vibrant island empire as a cultural experiment site or a beacon of knowledge to uplift humanity. Some ancient astronaut theorists, like Erich von Däniken, theorized that many mythic civilizations, Atlantis, Lemuria, etc., were essentially colonies of aliens who eventually left or perished. Under this narrative, the Eye of the Sahara might have been not just a city, but the central hub of an alien-human collaboration. And perhaps the Eye formation itself, so perfectly circular, might have attracted aliens for its geological uniqueness, or even been engineered by them as a perfect base visible from space. It is visible even by astronauts now, as if a marker. It's whimsical, but imagine the Richat Dome wasn't naturally eroded. Imagine those concentric rings were intentionally carved or terraformed by advanced technology to make a grand circular metropolis. With anti-gravity craft, cutting perfect rings in the Earth could be trivial. The local quartz-rich sand and rock could be fused into structures with high heat or lasers. Perhaps the reason no obvious ruins remain is because the city's materials were far beyond simple stone, maybe synthetic or metallic and removed by the Atlanteans, or aliens, when they evacuated, or corroded away over millennia. Some folks even proposed that Atlantis itself might have been an alien ship, like a giant mothership that resided on Earth for a time and then left or was destroyed, inspiring the myth of a disappearing island. This is far-fetched, but if you look at how Plato describes the island's concentric layout with canals, it's almost like a circuit board or some engineered product. If an ancient person saw a huge technological construct and tried to describe it, they might use analogies like rings and mountains and such. It's a very sci-fi rereading of Atlantis, I know, but kind of captivating as a late-night mental exercise. Even leaving aside direct alien involvement, some believe Atlantis' people themselves had unlocked technologies that we'd consider sci-fi. Harnessing cosmic energy, crystal power, perhaps even mastering genetics or dimensional travel. These claims, largely from trance readings, like Case, or theosophical texts, say Atlanteans could propel vehicles with energy beams, had airships, and even misused these powers to cause their downfall, such as a crystal that ran amok. If that were true, one could think of Atlanteans themselves as becoming alien to the rest of prehistoric humanity, a breed apart with godlike capabilities. When their continent sank, for whatever cause, survivors might be revered as gods by simpler humans due to their retained knowledge and artifacts. Tying back into those culture-bringer myths we discussed, a gentle cat's paw of skepticism might stroke this theory. If aliens helped Atlantis, why did they let it fall? Perhaps a prime directive of non-interference kicked in, or a cosmic catastrophe out of anyone's control happened, like a comet strike, that even aliens couldn't save them from. Or maybe there was a kind of hubris. Atlanteans, or their alien friends, overextended or angered other cosmic forces, leading to a punitive destruction, echoing the myth of gods punishing Atlantis. Interestingly, within UFO lore, there's talk of underwater alien bases. Some say there are USOs, unidentified submersible objects, seen around the Bahamas, Bermuda Triangle, etc. Areas that some tie to remnants of Atlantis. The Bermuda Triangle itself is steeped in legend of strange electromagnetic anomalies and disappearances of ships, planes. Some playful minds attribute that to leftover Atlantean tech or active alien devices under the sea. Could an alien installation still be operating in a sunken part of Atlantis, occasionally snatching up ships? It's a spooky campfire story, but one that highlights how Atlantis often features in paranormal theories. From a psychological perspective, the alien architect theory externalizes Atlantis' greatness. It suggests humans alone couldn't have done it, which is debatable. But since we're freewheeling here in dreamland, it's fine to toss aliens into the mix as possibilities. What it gives us is a grander scope. The idea that Atlantis' rise and fall might have been not just an earthly drama, but part of a cosmic one. Let's paint a serene mental vignette. an Atlantean astronomer priest atop a temple, observing a spacecraft descending like a second moon, touching down by the central temple. Gentle, enlightened beings emerge, sharing wisdom and maybe warning of future danger. The Atlanteans incorporate this star wisdom and flourish further, until one day, perhaps those beings try to evacuate key individuals as disaster looms, like the biblical Nephilim tales or flood heroes. Some legends, like among Maya, say their ancestors were carried away in flying serpent ropes when their land was destroyed. Who knows? Perhaps an alien evacuation saved some Atlanteans, and those became the seeds of later great cultures. If any of this were true, would we find evidence? Probably very little. Maybe anomalous materials in geological layers, or ancient artwork showing something odd, like the carvings at Abydos, Egypt, that some say depict helicopter-like shapes, though likely palimpsest effects. To the open-minded, those are hints of ancient high-tech or alien presence. To the mainstream, they're coincidences. As before, much would be hidden or lost. In our lullaby of ideas, though, each possibility is a star in the sky to marvel at, not needing immediate conclusion. The alien theory is like a shooting star, bright, a bit out there but captivating. Even if you don't literally believe it, pondering it can stretch our sense of wonder. That maybe humanity had celestial mentors or encounters in deep antiquity. Atlantis, when mentioned today, often invites an eye roll from academics, but what a dull world if we lost the daring to even imagine these connections. As long as we keep it as imaginative exploration, which we are, it does no harm, and actually kindles a childlike curiosity. And who among us, gazing at the Milky Way, hasn't felt that tickle of, are we alone? Have they been here? The gentle night encourages such musings. If you're nearly asleep, your dreams might even weave a story of ancient island temples under twin moons, with visitors from afar sharing secrets amidst crystal halls. A dreamy tableau that may not be real, but makes for a beautiful inner cinema. Let's slowly step off the spacecraft now and place our feet back on terra firma, or rather, on shifting sands. Aliens or not, Atlantis, as a continent in the sand or sea, would have left physical traces of its land, if not its people. Our next chapter will ground us again by looking at the continent in the sand, the idea of entire sunken or buried landmasses. We'll consider the Earth changes and how vast lands can truly vanish or reappear over epochs. That will gently guide us to bridging myth with geology as we continue unraveling the Atlantis mystery in a calm, reflective way. Chapter 8, A Continent in the Sand. The notion of a sunken continent usually brings to mind images of ocean depths. But here, in our story's context, we consider a continent sunken beneath sand. It sounds paradoxical at first. How can something sink into sand? Yet the Sahara itself is often poetically called a sea of sand. And over time it has swallowed mountains, rivers, and perhaps even cities. Let's explore the concept that Atlantis might have been not an island under the Atlantic Ocean, but rather part of a land now buried by the Great Desert. This perspective elegantly ties the sunken continent idea to the eye of the Sahara theory we've been circling around. First, let's appreciate the sheer size of the Sahara, about 9 million square kilometers, comparable to the area of the United States or China. It spans a width from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Hidden within this immensity are entire mountain ranges, like the Ahaggar, Tibesti, Air, vast plateaus and basins that once were lakes and wetlands. Satellite imagery has revealed the ghost lines of ancient rivers etched beneath the dunes. One of them, the Tamanrasset River we discussed, likely rivaled the Nile in its heyday sites. Suffolk.edu. To call the Sahara a barren nothingness is to underestimate it. It's more like a colossal library of Earth's past climates, with pages, sand layers that can be read by those who know how. Geologically, there have indeed been sunken lands on Earth. There's Zealandia, an almost continent-sized piece under the Pacific near New Zealand, which sank millions of years ago. There's the story of Doggerland, a fertile plain that connected Britain to Europe, which slowly drowned under rising North Sea levels around 6000 BC as the Ice Age ended. Closer to Plato's timeframe, we have island groups like the Azores and Canaries that are the peaks of an underwater plateau. If sea levels were lower, as they were during glaciation, those islands would have been larger and more connected. Not a full continent, but significantly more land exposed. Some have speculated about an Azores-centered large island pre-9600 BC that got mostly submerged when ice melted, leaving only small island tips, the Azores we have today. This fits a more classic Atlantis location, mid-Atlantic. But since we're leaning towards Sahara, consider similarly that sea levels rising could flood coastal plains in northwest Africa. Now, think of a scenario. Towards the end of the Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, the world's climate shifts violently. Not only do ice caps melt, raising oceans by over 120 meters, but rainfall patterns also change. North Africa, which was cold and dry during the glacial maximum, begins to get monsoon rains as the climate warms. It transforms, temporarily, into a green paradise. Atlantis could have thrived in that short window, or just before the final meltdown. But then, around 6,000 to 5,000 years ago, the rains retreat and the desert returns with a vengeance. Any coastal cities on the Atlantic might have been ruined by earlier flooding. Any inland cities now succumb to drought and sandstorms. Over millennia, sand accumulates, burying structures gradually. A continent in the sand suggests that under the Sahara's dunes might lie not just scattered relics, but perhaps large continuous expanses of once habitable land, effectively a lost world. Indeed, the concept of the land of Atlantis might not have been a discrete island, as we imagine an island surrounded entirely by water, but rather a distinct land bordered by sea in parts and by desert or marsh in others. Consider how someone in 9600 BC from Egypt, as the story purports, might describe an unfamiliar far-off land. If it was across the desert to the west, beyond reach of Egyptians, they might call it an island, metaphorically, or because it was isolated by both sea and impassable sands, an island of civilization in an ocean of wilderness. There's an interesting connection here. Some ancient Egyptian records, like the writings of a priest Manetho, or even hints in the Edfu building texts, speak of a primeval sacred island home of the gods that was destroyed in a flood. It's vague and mythic, but Egypt itself had legends of a distant homeland lost to catastrophe. Was that Atlantis? Or perhaps something like the mythical island of the West, Amenti in Egyptian lore, often associated with the afterlife. It's poetic, but maybe the Egyptians symbolically recalled a western land, Atlantis, that sank and became a realm of the dead, hence afterlife locale. Now, physically, what evidence would a continent in the sand leave behind? Possibly fossil water. Aquifers under the Sahara are relics of its green times. We found evidence of huge paleolakes from space. Possibly unusual deposits like diatomaceous earth or salt pans in odd places, like remote salt flats indicating former large lakes. Indeed, the Sahara has vast salt flats in places like the Taudeni Basin, even far inland, showing the presence of ancient seas or megalakes. If Atlantis had canals and irrigation, you'd expect some sign like straight-line residues in soil composition or geometrical patterns visible via LiDAR under the dunes. So far, none clearly identified as such have been published, but the Sahara is underscanned compared to, say, Maya jungles, partly due to shifting sands complicating ground-penetrating radar. Another clue? The Sahara periodically has yielded marine fossils and even a whale skeleton in Wadi al-Hitan, Egypt. But those are from millions of years ago when the ocean covered North Africa. So not directly Atlantis, but it shows that the sand sea analogy holds deep time truth. This desert was ocean before, and might have smaller seas in between. There was a known shallow trans-Saharan seaway about 50 million years ago, cites Suffolk.edu. And even in more recent times, late Pleistocene, large parts of North Africa were covered by enormous lakes or wetlands. Legendary maps sometimes depicted a Sea of Zaire or Inner Sea in the Sahara, based on classical speculation. None existed in human times that we know. But it's captivating to think a sudden incursion of the Atlantic could have carved a temporary inland sea. For example, if rising sea levels found a low basin to pour into. Is there a geologically plausible breach? If the Gibraltar Strait had somehow closed and then reopened catastrophically, The Atlantic could flood a lot of land. However, data suggests the big basins of the Sahara are above current sea level or blocked by highlands. One scenario sometimes floated by rogue theorists: if a crustal tilt or shift happened, like Charles Hapgood's Earth crust displacement theory, which Einstein even once mused about, the latitudes of lands could change rapidly, submerging some, exposing others. Under that idea, maybe Atlantis sank not by water rising alone, but by the ground moving. This brings us to something. Plato said earthquakes helped sink Atlantis. The region around Morocco, Algeria, does have quakes. It's near plate boundaries, the African and Eurasian plates. A big enough quake can cause ground liquefaction or subsidence. We know of real cases where quakes submerged land, like Port Royal in Jamaica, 1692, where a quake sank part of a city into the sea. If an advanced city in coastal Mauritania existed, a series of quakes and tsunamis, perhaps triggered by a comet impact in the ocean, as some suggest happened 12,800 years ago during the Younger Dryas climate event, could have shattered it. The ocean might have rushed in temporarily. Some evidence of mega tsunami deposits have been noted along Atlantic coasts, like large boulders carried inland. After it receded, it leaves behind salt, mud, and ruins now mixed with natural sediment. Then desertification covers it all. Meanwhile, the survivors who fled might later recount the sea swallowed it. I recall an interesting detail. The Richat's outer ring sits at about 400 meters above current sea level. It seems too high to have been under the ocean, even with sea level rise, 120 meters at most. But if Atlantis' destruction involved not literal ocean submergence, but a combination of floods and the land becoming unreachable, Plato's phrasing of a muddy shoal blocking navigation could be metaphorical for the region becoming a silted swamp, then drying into desert. A land can sink in utility even if not fully underwater. In essence, the continent in the sand may not be a single discrete landmass like Australia hiding fully intact under dunes. It's more like large portions of what were once fertile, populated African landscapes have been entombed by sand and turned to desert, effectively erasing a civilization that once thrived there. If one day climate shifts again and rains return, which they might in thousands of years due to Earth's orbital cycles, the Sahara could bloom and perhaps even reveal old structures as winds move dunes away. That leads to a poetic thought. Perhaps Atlantis awakens when the land itself awakens. We'll touch on that soon. Indeed, some climate models say the Sahara will be green again tens of thousands of years from now. If people are still around, maybe they'll stumble on the ruins of our current civilization or older ones beneath the sand. On a more immediate timescale, archaeologists have started employing LiDAR and other tech in desert edges, finding things like the lost city of the Garamantes via satellite in Libya in 2011. They found entire fortified towns under sand. If such a relatively recent civilization, 500 BC, 500 AD, got buried and only now seen by satellites, one wonders what older remains might lurk deeper, overlooked. I find comfort in the thought that Earth can hide its stories so well, but also reveal them in time. In a dreamy way, one could imagine the soul of a continent sleeping under the dunes, breathing in slow centuries. The concept of a sleeping continent aligns with mystic ideas. Theosophy spoke of root races and continents, Atlantis, Lemuria, that come and go, each harboring an epoch of spiritual evolution. They said when one epoch ends, its land often perishes to make way for the next. A very allegorical way to see geology. If Atlantis was an actual land now hidden, maybe it's waiting for when humanity is ready to learn from its tale, to physically uncover it without greed or prejudice. We live at a time where technology could in the next decades strip away many of Earth's secrets. Imagine fleets of autonomous drones mapping every square meter of the Sahara with penetrating radar, AI recognizing any unnatural patterns. Perhaps this will happen and yield nothing extraordinary. Or maybe it will pinpoint a grid of buried walls somewhere. What a stir that would cause. A new Mohenjo-Daro or a city older than Jericho under the sands of Mauritania would upend our timeline subtly, confirming that complex societies existed earlier outside known cradles. It wouldn't prove aliens or Atlantean superpowers, but it would vindicate the kernel of Plato's story, a forgotten chapter of human history. If I close my eyes, I can almost see it. Dunes parting after a storm, revealing a weathered stone, perhaps with inscriptions in an unknown script. A team of desert nomads finds it and calls experts. Excavation commences and reveals concentric foundations or a canal bed. The news spreads. Lost city, found in Sahara. Could this be Atlantis? For a while, the world buzzes. We'd have debates, more expeditions, and maybe finally a consensus. Yes, this culture fits the Atlantis narrative in time and place. Yet, as enthralling as that would be, I wonder if it would solve the deeper enigma or just deepen it. We'd then ask, how did they achieve what they did and why did they fall? And that loops us to the next chapter. Echoes of a lost race and knowledge passing on. Before moving there, let's gently summarize our journey in this chapter. Earth's landscapes are ever-changing. Lands can vanish by water or by sand or by shifting below ground. Atlantis could very well be an example of such transience. The phrase continent in the sand reminds us that not all vanishings are into waves, some are into the dust of ages. But hidden does not mean gone forever. As we become more capable as explorers physically and intellectually, we might piece together this buried puzzle. Our narrative flows next into those echoes of a lost race, the legacies and hints that Atlanteans, if we call them that, might have imparted to later humans. We've touched on some, myths, advanced knowledge, but now we'll delve specifically into how a civilization's memory can endure even when its bricks and mortar are gone. Drift along, still comfortably ensconced, as we listen for those faint echoes across time, bridging Atlantis to our present. Chapter 9. Echoes of a Lost Race. Even when a great civilization disappears, its influence can ripple through the ages in subtle and not so subtle ways. These are the echoes of a lost race, fragments of language, technology, mythology, and culture that survived the catastrophe, carried by survivors or admired and adopted by others. If Atlantis existed and fell, surely something of its people must have remained in the world, in the memories of descendants, in the skills they taught their neighbors, or in the legends that proliferated. In this chapter, let's gently track those possible echoes, like following a faint melody through a forest. One of the clearest potential echoes is in the flood myths that pervade nearly every culture on Earth. The tale of a great flood that destroyed a former world is ubiquitous. From the biblical Noah, to the Mesopotamian Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, to India's Manu, to the tales of Deucalion in Greek myth, and the legend of Gunyu in China. Could all these disparate cultures be remembering, through a glass darkly, the same event? The end of the last ice age, and the flooding of lowlands worldwide, which would include any Atlantean realm. It's plausible that early civilizations, astonished by sea level rise or regional flood disasters, encoded it in story form. But often those myths also mention a civilization or a virtuous few, saved with knowledge intact to restart humanity. For instance, after the Greek flood of Deucalion, a new human race is born from stones. After Noah's flood, Noah's offspring repopulate and carry on civilization. So the echo suggests something was before, it was lost, but something was saved to seed what came after. If Atlantis was real, the survivors might be precisely those Noahs and culture bearers behind the myths. We have actual historical accounts, outside Plato, that hint at lost lands or advanced ancients. The Greek philosopher Solon, who is key to the Atlantis story as he's said to have heard it in Egypt, also visited Lydia in modern Turkey, where he was told of a massive flood long ago that nearly ended their society. The Egyptians themselves took pride in being the oldest civilization and hinted they'd seen others rise and fall. Maybe they kept records of a mighty western neighbour that fell, which they recounted to Solon. Now, consider linguistic echoes. Some alternative historians search for Atlantean remnants in language families. One theory suggests the mysterious Basque language of the Pyrenees, which is unrelated to any other language in Europe, might be a survivor of an Atlantean tongue. if one imagines refugees from a sunken land settled in Iberia. That's highly speculative, but Basque does have words with no clear origin. Similarly, certain North African Berber legends speak of a former island home or lost fertile lands to the west. Could their language hold clues? Hard to say without a known Atlantean language to compare. Architectural and scientific knowledge can be powerful echoes. For example, the pyramids of Egypt stand as an enigma of sophisticated engineering around 2500 BC. Did the Egyptians devise that wholly on their own? Or were they inspired by something earlier? The oldest Egyptian pyramids, Step Pyramid of Djoser, are abrupt leaps forward in design, albeit plausible through genius of Imhotep, but some wonder if there were precursors unpreserved, like maybe mud brick pyramids that eroded, or external influence. If Atlanteans had monumental architecture, maybe an echo of that concept reached the Nile, or even the Americas. The coincidence of pyramid-like structures worldwide, Egypt, Mesopotamia, ziggurats, India, step temples, Mesoamerica, Maya, Aztec pyramids, might just be parallel evolution. People realize building large requires broad bases, but some fringe thinkers see it as a legacy of a mother culture's architectural style diffusing globally. It's a romantic thought. Survivors of Atlantis traveling and teaching how to build great stone structures to remember the cosmos or serve as refuges. Another echo could be in technology and measurements. Some point to how ancient cultures separated by oceans all worked with surprisingly sophisticated astronomy, like aligning monuments to solstices and equinoxes, or encoding mathematical constants. The Great Pyramid's dimensions famously encode the approximate value of pi and the length of a solar year through its perimeter to height ratio. Was that just the Egyptians? Or did they inherit some of that knowledge? The concept of a 360-degree circle, 60-minute hour, the sexagesimal system of Sumer, and certain geometric ratios appear across old world civilizations as if a shared legacy. If Atlanteans were as advanced as claimed, perhaps they formulated standards and math that later seeped into these younger cultures. There are also genetic echoes to consider. Modern genetics has traced human migrations. One curious mystery is the existence of a very distinct lineage, the haplogroup X, found in both some European, Middle Eastern populations and among some Native American groups, like certain tribes around the Great Lakes. It's minor but puzzling because it suggests a connection that mainstream theory can't fully explain. Some propose an Ice Age Atlantic crossing or a Beringian isolate group. A wild hypothesis by some fringe authors is that Atlanteans, or Solutreans, as a known Ice Age European culture, in another theory about early Americans, crossed to the Americas and left that genetic marker. This remains speculative and not widely accepted, but it's a tantalizing notion that bloodlines themselves carry an echo of a lost people. Now, mythology beyond flood stories sometimes hints at a golden age, a distant splendid city or land of the gods that is now inaccessible. The Greeks had the Garden of the Hesperides in the far west, a paradise with a tree of golden apples. The Celts spoke of Avalon or High Brazil, western isles of plenty and eternal youth, sometimes visible just beyond the horizon. These could be allegory for the afterlife or faint cultural memories of actual lands now vanished over the horizon. In West Africa, interestingly, there are legends of a far-off western land too. Some coastal tribes talked about a place of riches that sunk, though these might be influenced by later contact stories. We should mention the Mesoamerican lore. Aztecs said their ancestors came from an island called Aztlan to the north, which some have playfully linked to Atlantis, though linguistically it's Nahuatl for place of herons, and likely refers to somewhere in northwest Mexico or a metaphorical origin. The Maya have the tale of Tolan, or the age of the first sun, that ended with floods and black rain, and survivors starting over. And the Andean people, like Aymara, have legends of Tiwanaku, an ancient city at Lake Titicaca, being built by surviving giants from a sunk land. Interestingly, one Inca legend mentions a continent called Antis that sank, which is often dismissed as apocryphal or confusion with the Antisuyu Eastern Forests region. But if that legend were genuine, Antis sounds too close to Atlantis to ignore, though likely coincidental. Still, even the name Andes and Antilles have that ant-atl root, which some creative minds like to see as linguistic drift from Atlantis. Again, not academically supported, but an intriguing echo in sound. On the spiritual side, theosophists like Madame Blavatsky and Edgar Case's readings speak of Atlantean souls reincarnating in modern times, or Atlantean crystal technology lying dormant, waiting to be rediscovered. Those are very esoteric echoes, not verifiable, but they contributed to a modern mythos where people feel connected to Atlantis in dreams or regressions. Is it possible that our collective unconscious, as Carl Jung might suggest, carries archaic memories? Some have speculated that flood and lost civilization myths are archetypes in the collective unconscious, psychological echoes of real distant traumas and falls from grace. In that sense, every time we tell a story of a utopia that falls due to hubris, which we do often in fiction, we're echoing Atlantis. Even linguistically in Plato's account, some scholars have tried to dissect the name Atlantis. It's said to mean Island of Atlas, linking it to Greek Titan Atlas, who incidentally was said to be the first king of Atlantis in Plato's story, an interesting blending of myth. But Atlas in myth held up the sky at the western edge of the world, i.e., far west beyond the known, a neat symbolic link. The Atlantic Ocean is named after Atlas, presumably because it lay beyond his pillar. Could it be the ocean got its name not just from the Titan, but indirectly from the story of Atlantis? Hard to prove, since Atlantic was a term used by Herodotus before Plato wrote Atlantis. But if Egyptians or earlier sailors had name for that ocean referencing a lost land, it might have trickled to Greeks as Sea of Atlas, just a thought. Another echo could be geographic knowledge that seems ahead of its time. For instance, some point to ancient world maps, again the Piri race or others, which might hint at knowledge of coastlines beyond where those cultures officially travelled. If that were true, perhaps Atlanteans, being seafarers, mapped far and wide, and that knowledge, fragmentary, ended up in later maps. It's contentious, but even the idea the Phoenicians circumnavigated Africa, which Herodotus claims they did in 600 BC, might have been guided by older knowledge or trading posts possibly established by an earlier maritime culture, Atlantis or otherwise. One concrete echo. In Egyptian, the sunken temple city of Heraklion, Thonis, in the Nile Delta was found underwater recently, and it had stela that mentioned decrees about foreigners from the sea and such. It wasn't Atlantis, but shows that Egyptians did experience cities sinking due to local subsidence and had to resettle. They might easily transfer that concept to a bigger narrative if they had heard of or remembered a big one like Atlantis. As we gather these echoes, individually they are tenuous, but collectively they weave a tapestry of tantalizing hints. A near universal flood memory, traces of advanced knowledge appearing in early societies, linguistic oddities hinting at ancient contacts, cultural heroes and gods that came from disaster and gave knowledge, strange artifacts like those out-of-place items or even the famous Baghdad battery, an object that shows an understanding of electrochemistry in 200 BC. If Atlanteans had electricity, maybe they passed some idea along. And of course, the story Plato wrote itself, an explicit echo handed down via Egyptian priests, if we take him at face value. It's almost comforting to think that knowledge rarely ever disappears completely. Some seed always survives. In our context, the lost race of Atlanteans might have seen their world end, but in the new world that followed, their children or students built anew, perhaps giving rise to places like Egypt, the high cultures of the Americas, or the mysterious megalithic sites scattered worldwide, like Göbekli Tepe or Stonehenge, or the meticulously aligned Nabta Playa Circle in the Nubian desert, 5000 BC, which predates Stonehenge. How did nomads do that? Possibly by themselves, but one could imagine knowledge passed down. As an analogy, think of the fall of Rome. The Roman Empire fell, but its knowledge was partly preserved by monks, by the Byzantine Empire, by the Islamic scholars, so later generations in medieval Europe slowly regained classical knowledge, sparking the Renaissance. If Atlantis fell, perhaps nearby civilizations, like Egypt or those in Iberia, served as the monks, preserving bits of Atlantean lore which later fueled the known ancient world's leaps, Maybe that's why around 3000 BC multiple civilizations blossomed almost concurrently. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus, as if catalyzed by something. Conventionally, that's just agriculture reaching critical mass, but fringe might say it's remnants of an older golden age spark. Now, as we near the end of our journey, these echoes do more than tantalize. They urge us to reconsider how interconnected human history might be, and how legends often carry a grain of truth. Perhaps by listening to these echoes without dismissing them outright, we might glean instructions or warnings. One common theme: Atlantis is often used as a cautionary tale of hubris and environmental disregard. Many modern storytellers draw parallels to our society, advanced, perhaps overreaching, and at risk from nature or our own doings. If that's an echo, it's a potent one. Take care, or you might repeat Atlantis's fate. In a poetic sense, maybe the greatest echo of Atlantis is our enduring fascination with it. Across millennia, the idea of an ideal society that met a tragic end touches something deep: our yearning for lost perfection and our fear of self-destruction. In that way, every time someone writes a utopian story or post-apocalyptic caution, Atlantis's echo lives in that narrative. We have one more chapter ahead. Atlantis awakens. A positive turn, perhaps. After all these mysteries, what if Atlantis isn't just a closed chapter, but something that could awaken in our consciousness, or maybe even physically, via discoveries? It will be a fitting closing to consider that maybe the story isn't over. Atlantis, in one form or another, could rise again. Let's gently move to that hopeful conclusion, allowing all we've learned to settle like gentle sediment in our mind, ready to form new land. Chapter 10. Atlantis Awakens. Our journey is drawing to a close, dear friend, and now we contemplate the dawn after the long night of mystery. Atlantis awakens. What could that mean? In the context of a sleep story, it's the moment where our tale finds resolution and hope, easing you into peaceful dreams. Symbolically, it suggests that what was once lost could be found. What was forgotten could be remembered. What was myth could become reality again, or at least a lesson illuminated. Imagine, if you will, a tranquil morning over the Sahara. The first light of sun spreads a golden sheet over the dunes. For ages, those sands have guarded their secret. But maybe today is special. Perhaps a strong wind blew in the night, uncovering something remarkable. As the light grows, the outline of a stone structure is seen where yesterday there was only sand. Could it be? Researchers, alerted by satellites, rush to the site. Brushing aside fine grains, they uncover carved symbols, walls, maybe even a ringed foundation. Little by little, an ancient city reveals itself. It's not complete, time has worn it down, but it matches descriptions known from Plato and others. The world is stunned and excited. Atlantis has awakened from its slumber. Now that is one way, the literal rediscovery of physical Atlantis. It may or may not happen in our lifetimes, but it's a lovely thought that somewhere under either ocean or desert, evidence waits for that perfect moment to emerge. However, awakening need not be literal. There's also the awakening of understanding. Perhaps we, as a collective, are gradually piecing together the truth of our own past. In recent decades, how many new finds have extended our timelines and shattered assumptions? Göbekli Tepe made us realize organized religion and monumental building existed much earlier than we thought. Underwater archaeology around coastlines is finding settlements that were submerged after the Ice Age, pushing dates of certain human activities further back. It's as if glimpses of a previous cycle of civilization are coming to light. We often think of civilization starting around 4000, 3000 BC, but maybe we're on the cusp of learning about earlier chapters. In that sense, the spirit of Atlantis, representing Ice Age civilization, is awakening in scientific consciousness. One could say Atlantis has already awakened in the cultural sense. Compare the 19th century to now. Back then, only a few scholars and mystics talked of Atlantis. Today, Atlantis is everywhere in pop culture: movies, literature, songs, video games. Not as an obscure footnote, but often as a central theme. It's as if modern humanity subconsciously wants Atlantis to be real, to teach us something. Why? Possibly as a mirror to ourselves, to remind us not to be arrogant with our technology or environment, or as inspiration, a vision of a peaceful, abundant world we might strive to create. Many see Atlantis not just in terms of its fall, but in the ideal of an advanced, harmonious society it might have been at its peak. There's also the angle of personal awakening. Many individuals claim a spiritual connection to Atlantis, feeling they have past life memories or innate affinities, like a fascination with the ocean, crystals, etc. For them, Atlantis awakens could mean accessing those deep memories for personal growth or healing karmic patterns. In a sleep story context, that's a gentle prompt. Perhaps in your dreams tonight, you might wander the beautiful halls of Atlantis, learning something about yourself and humanity, and wake up with a new perspective or creativity sparked. That's a peaceful kind of awakening, through dream. No secret can sleep forever, my dear one. In time, truth rises like the sun. Indeed, knowledge likes to be known. If Atlantis was real, it wants to be found. Not physically maybe, but intellectually. And if it was a myth, well, it still serves as a perennial fable that awakens caution and wonder in us. We should also consider the Earth's cyclic nature. Some believe civilizations rise and fall in great yugas, ages. If we're at the end of one cycle and about to begin another, some associate the age of Aquarius with new enlightenment, perhaps Atlantean wisdom, presumably lost in the dark ages after its fall, will re-emerge as part of human evolution. That's a theme in esoteric traditions, that Atlanteans had psychic abilities and living in balance with nature via crystal energy, etc., which we lost but might regain as we spiritually progress. So, awakening Atlantis can mean awakening those latent human potentials again. From a more concrete angle, who knows, maybe one day soon a breakthrough in translation of some ancient script like Linear A from Crete or the undeciphered symbols of the earliest Vinci culture in Europe might reveal a direct reference to a mother civilization. That would academically wake Atlantis from mere legend to historical discussion. It has happened before. Troy was a legend until Schliemann found it and evidence matched myth. Now, Troy didn't have supernatural aspects like Atlantis, but it's a precedent for myth becoming history. I like to imagine a positive scenario for Earth's future, often depicted in metaphysical circles. That one day, we'll responsibly use technology in harmony with the planet, possibly tapping into non-polluting energy sources, like those crystals or some quantum field. Essentially becoming what many might call a neo-Atlantis, a globally unified yet diverse civilization, advanced and peaceful. In this vision, Atlantis isn't something in the past at all, but a blueprint for a possible enlightened future that we are slowly awakening to. Perhaps that's why the story endures, not as a warning alone, but as an inspiration to do better with knowledge. After journeying through these ideas, an awakened Atlantis means we don't let its memory stay buried as a mere cautionary tale. We actively dialogue with it, learning the lessons of hubris, so we avoid destruction, striving for its heights of wisdom and advancement, so we improve life, and appreciating the fragility and preciousness of civilization, so we safeguard ours better. So, my dear sleepy friend, as Golden Chonk would say in closing, we've roamed far and wide in myth and reality, and now it's time to drift into slumber, carrying the secrets of Atlantis kindly within. Tomorrow is new, and who knows? Perhaps you'll see the world with fresh eyes, maybe an Eye of Sahara perspective. For now, rest, safe with the knowledge that mysteries endure, but so does hope and wisdom. Atlantis sleeps, but also stirs in you and me. With that thought, we bid it and you a gentle good night. Meow, meow.